Well, Oki, Sinatapi, hello, how are you? Welcome to the Native Wellness Institute Power Hour. And thank you, Shailene, for helping us out, producing us today. Um, we were just saying it's week 39. So, welcome to the 39th week of the Native Institute Power Hour. And with that, would like to very much express gratitude to Nike 7 for sponsoring this. Would very much like to express gratitude to all of those who come and join us every day. And just to remind you, all these 39 weeks are on YouTube and also on our website, and they're also on our Facebook Live. So if you want to go back, or we have a very special guest today, and just if you want to have your friends watch any of the power hours, because we're trying to stay positive, productive, and proactive in our healing. And so welcome. And I just, my English name is Theda Newbreast. My Nistuni Daniko, my Indian name is Mokoyo Sokoyi. It means the Milky Way, or the Wolf's Trail, or the Medicine Trail. So our special guest, and I was just sharing with Asa before he comes on. I wanted to just share with you. Asa was the person who he helped me with my healing to get my tamoko, to get my ink, for my father's death, for the women in our family, but also most recently this tamoko, because for me as a heterosexual woman, I continually have to work on trusting men. And it's because, I got an A score that's 10, that's my A score 10. And so but I was just thanking Asa, because he really influenced me to, once I got this, and once you get these tamokos, on your feminine side of your body and your male side, I swear it's like a medicine that follows you and really builds bridges to healing. So that's enough out of me. This is our platform. I wanted all of you to welcome our guest, Asa Wright, and he is going to. Today's part one, and we're doing part two tomorrow. So, Asa, would you please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are?
Right. Waklisi Damadichki, Gausasas Asa Wright. Hello, how are you? My name is Asa Wright. I'm Klamath Modoc Yuhuskin from Chiloquin, Oregon. And I'm currently calling in from the occupied homelands of the Multnomah and Chinook people, or Portland, Oregon. I'm really happy to be here with you today. My pronouns are he and him, and I identify as a two-spirit trans man. And I just wanted to say thank you, to the Power Hour and Wellness Institute and Theda and Shailene for having me here today, and allowing this to be a two-part series. In talking about this, I mentioned that I could probably go on for days, and so thankfully they allowed this to be a two-part session, because I think there's a lot that is not talked about that needs to be talked about, and I think can be very healing for communities and individuals. I did want to put a disclaimer that I'm an expert only in my own lived experience, and this is from my lived experience. This is my story, my worldview, my perspective, and I think that there are as many experiences as there are stars in the sky. So I think just to keep that in mind, and that, there might be triggers, there might be sad things, but this is also a story of resiliency. This is my life experience and a lot of experiences of your own family members. So I hope that, you know, whatever I share I hope that you're able to hear it, and to, I guess, look at your family members in a different way, and be the support that they need in their lives. So thank you for having me here today.
Thank you, Asa. I was before we were just visiting, and I was just sharing with Asa that, you know, when I have an adopted daughter that I got when she was 14, and I woke up this morning, you know, I was still like in dreamland, but I remember when she first started living with me, and she used to ask me, she'd say, "Mom, I don't know if I like boys or I like girls." And in parenting, you know, I sometimes when we're parenting, we don't. It's no one gave us a book. So I would just always, my response was, because what I had learned over my life experience, you know, growing up in San Francisco. So I just would tell my daughter at that time, I said, you know, it, you'll know, you'll know. I said, you just go along. It doesn't, you'll, you'll find it as you go. I said, but one day you're going to meet someone and boom, you'll know. And so I just, so we were just sharing. And so Asa, tell me, what is your story? What is your life experience like? And you know, you could start sharing. You know, like, where did you grow up? You know, why did you choose to live where you're living now? Um, Tell us. Let's just start there.
All right. I grew up in Southern Oregon. Um, my dad's family is from Chiloquin and Klamath area, and my mom's family lived in and around Roseburg area, and so I went back and forth a lot between those two places. And growing up, and I grew up with a single mother, and I claim that we were both raised by my grandparents because she had me at a very young age. She was still in high school. Um, so we kind of grew up together. And then, excuse me, she had another son. So I grew up with my little brother, and then my dad has 5 children who I got to see here and there. And then when I was about 15, I actually moved out onto my own. And, you know, through the help of some other family members and one aunt in particular, uh, I had the opportunity to go to college up here in Portland. And so I took that opportunity at 17 and I started up here at Portland State University. Um, and yeah, it was a huge culture shock for me to be up here in the city and not really know what I was doing or where I was going. Um, but I attribute that as a blessing because I think that really helped me learn more about Portland in general. Um, because I got lost up here all the time. And so I feel like I know this city really well now. And I feel like it really is home because um, I had to find my own way up here. Um, but I also was able to find uh, community in various ways. And also, I feel like this is where I grew up. This is where I was able to find out more about who I am and really come into myself and into, uh, I guess, the beginning of the start of my own family.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
Portland has been really important to me in my growth and who I am today.
That's awesome because you know I always encourage everyone and everyone who's watching. You know, where you grow up. I mean, like, you know, if you grow up in the South, and we learn through our national efforts and our elections now, it's different regions, and there's different gentleness or acceptability. And I guess I'm just old school because you know I got raised in Berkeley and you know raised with like mind kind of civil rights kind of social justice thinkers. And I was just so what do you think influenced you, or what was gentle with you? Was it what safety areas or what? Because I know where we grow up, and if we're our subject area around LGBTQ and two spirit or transgender. Because when I worked in San Francisco, I was just thinking, I worked in the SHARE program, and it was a treatment program. And this is like, 79, 80. And I worked with everybody on our staff. Our secretary was gay. Our preceptor was from Canada, was bisexual. And then our main counselors, it was just, we grew up in it. But then I realized if I was in a different part of Nebraska or South Dakota or somewhere, I wouldn't have got that education or that safety or that so can you share with us, like, like 17, wow, that's brave and courageous, but that's for some that's normal. We move out and go on our own. Can you tell us a little bit about that story and what avenues helped you find who you were, or in what avenues kind of slapped you in your face and not allowed you to be who you are?
Yeah, I would say early on that my protective circle was always my great grandma who raised me. Um,
Mm,
and I think it was losing her that kind of propelled me uh, to find my own way. Um,
mm,
so that's when I moved out onto my own, is when she passed. And I helped take care of her till the end. And then was like, okay, what do I do now? Um, so I really felt like, she kind of kept me in this protective love bubble of like accepting me for who I was. And really, I think looking back at that time, I feel like she saw me for who I was,
mm,
all of me. And so that was really important to me. There's a saying that I tell my own child, um, uh, let your fear feed your strength. And I think that I've lived that way for so long that I don't feel like, oh, you're so strong, or you've done this. And so, like, I feel like I've been living within fear uh, my whole life. And I don't think, in some ways, yeah, you could look at that as being sad, but I think it's a good motivator. It's also something that has helped build my strength. Um, and so yeah, it was really scary moving to Portland and moving away from what I knew, and not knowing what I was going to encounter. Um, and my next like group of support ended up being um, fellow classmates at college, uh,
mm,
and and I think in that way, or having that circle of friends or that new family was important. I think because all of us, I think in some way, we're looking for a new family, and we're looking for support circles that maybe we didn't get at home. So that was a really important growth time of growth for all of us, and a lot of us who were trying to figure out who we were and what that meant and what it meant to be in this LGBTQ community,
mm.
and what identity meant to us. So I think that was really like pivotal moment for me and for a lot of my friends who I still have to this day, of just trying to figure out who we were.
Mm-hmm. And that's awesome because, like, even because grandma safety bubbles are pretty damn good. When you got grandma, and if you're privileged to have grandpa, but when you have that safety bubble, and then almost like going and finding that safety bubble at college. So let me ask you this: when you were discovering yourself, did what was like the first dates that you went on with someone, or did you just like shy back, or did you? Because, like, some of us, we would go date all kinds, And then some of us, dating is just damn scary. You know? So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think it's interesting with a lot of LGBT, or I'm gonna use the word queer. I like that umbrella. I'm kind of old school. I know that some people, shy away from that word, or it it, it comes from a place of like concern of uh, if that's a good word to use or not. But I kind of like that use. I kind of like to use that umbrella, but like I feel like when I was younger, and I think times have definitely changed, and in hearing my own child's stories and seeing this new generation, I think it's definitely different. But for me, coming from my perspective and from where I was at that time, it seemed like with a lot of queer folks that once you found somebody, like it was just kind of like uh, instant relationship. So it was kind of like, let's go on this date. Okay, now we're just together forever. Kind of a feeling. So I think it was also like this, oh, I found somebody who I can relate to and who can relate to my experience as well. And so let's just stay together, kind of a thing. So I think that's what a lot of what I was seeing at that time was either like people dating a lot of people and trying to figure out who's their person or if they even want a person, and then the like uh, other side was people just getting into relationships instantly and then staying in like long-term relationships.
Hmm, hmm. Yeah, I remember. I guess I'm kind of old school like you in some sense because I remember people saying, "Yeah, those dang lesbians, they just meet each other and they got the U-Haul and they're living together." They bring the U-Haul, and then so maybe you could share with us what if you were advising someone who is just discovering themselves and maybe they went out and they dated different genders when they're just what would be some of your advice because you Asa, you're a pretty grounded man. You're a pretty grounded. There's like a groundedness with you have some wisdom. What would be your advice to some of our young people who are exploring?
Well, I have a 16-year-old kiddo who we often have these conversations. And like I was talking to you earlier, they're at an age right now where like all the stories that they're reading, all the movies that they're watching, it's about these first experiences with love or finding your first love and stuff like that. And so we've kind of had these conversations. Um, I would just say that it's no matter if you fit within this queer community or two-spirit community or not, I think that we're always learning and growing as people and as individuals and constantly getting to know ourselves. And I think that's just part of the human experience. But what I often tell my kiddo is to, I think love kind of like hits you when it's completely unexpected. I often tell my kiddo that uh, you'll be walking down the street one day and turn the corner and bam, there's somebody and there's some kind of feelings there that might lead to something. Um, so I often tell them not to rush it. Um, Often tell them to get to know themselves and to love themselves and who they are, uh,
Mm,
and and that just to keep aware or like be aware that that relationships should be like this partnership and not to be too dependent on other folks. I think that's where you kind of cross the line of becoming unhealthy. And I think, unfortunately, because a lot of the queer community has had so much trauma that lives out in our relationships. And so sometimes, we will have unhealthy like codependencies, unhealthy relationships because we're looking for somebody who can understand us a lot of the time and understand our experiences. And so sometimes that plays out in unhealthy ways in our relationships. And so um, I would just say like be aware of where you're at and your love of self, and going into relationships knowing what you want, and what's healthy for you.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I think
You know,
creating boundaries too. And I think it's different for different levels of people. I know, like, as a person who, as a trans male, um, and as I said about the growing and learning always, is that as soon as I transitioned, I learned something new about myself, and and well, I learned a lot of new things about myself. But one of the things with dating was another fear popped up of, like, I don't want to be, um, because I am kind of old school. I prefer monogamous relationships and long-term relationships. Uh, I didn't want to be somebody out there who people just kind of tried on, I guess, to have their first experience with a trans person. Um, and so that definitely played out in my dating experience.
mhm. And I was just thinking about, because like I live in a community where there's homophobia and then there's acceptance.
Mhm.
And so I've been just thinking about our young people. Like I have these two relatives when they were 10 years old, and they were showing, starting to show themselves. And I was thinking one family kind of, and it's okay now, but they were trying to, and they were both boys, born looking like boys. But then as they were trying to come out, one family, um, with their 10-year-old was kind of steering him, teasing him about girlfriends, but that was not his interest. And then the other family just let this 10-year-old, I mean, they'd let him go pick out everything for his room. And I remember, I just love, because when I got to see his room, the first thing he showed me was his sheets. And his sheets said "chicks rule." You know? and and then I just thought, so can you visit with us a little bit about, when a young person is finding out who they are, um, how we can encourage that and how we can flourish that. Because with our homophobic part, you know, they um, they hurt them.
Mhm.
And like here, like the suicides we had was because their family just kept hurting them, trying to, and and they ended their life, in one extreme. But can you share with us how we could, in our world, encourage, um, our younger people, are the ones, who are finally discovering themselves? How could we encourage that person to blossom?
Yeah. I think it's good for families, parents, everybody to be aware that, um, that that people in general might be coming into awareness about who they are at varying ages, and stages in life. Um, and then also to be like aware, and Google and do your research about the differences, because, you know, uh, with this whole like LGBTQ umbrella, we're talking about sexuality, and we're also talking about gender. And both of those things have so much underneath them and within them. Um, and each of those experiences vary. For me, uh, I had a coming out story, um, or I have a coming out story. I have a transition experience. Um, and that all has come through various stages of my life. Uh, and And for me, I knew there was a difference when I entered Head Start. And so the Indian education program where I was had a Head Start program. And when I was 4 years old, I entered that Head Start. And when I was 4 years old and being with other boys and girls, that was my light bulb moment for me of like, wow, something is different here. Um, and it was also my light bulb moment of, um, this difference can get me in trouble. and this difference might be a little scary. And so that's a lot for a 4-year-old to take on. But I think that's where I started wearing a mask. Um, and I think this is really important for people to hear, that there's a lot lost once a person puts that mask on. And that mask gets so comfortable and so worn in that sometimes we even lose who we are by wearing that mask. And so when we get to those stages where we're able to take those masks off, often we need to relearn who we are as well. And I think so much potential is lost in the world, and so much love is lost, so much everything about the human experience is lost because you're not seeing this person in your life at 100%. You don't get the full story of who they are. And so can you imagine that some of my elders and the two-spirit people, trans people, whoever came before me, like the world has lost so much in that we didn't know them completely. And so I think that's why I talk about my story, and that's why I share. I don't, I still have fear. I still don't want to lose community and culture. I'm 40 years old and I haven't lost that yet. I've had various things that have come and gone. But that's still a very deep fear that lives within me. And I think that we need to realize that too, in looking at our children and our family members who are under that queer umbrella, under that two-spirit umbrella. We live in a lot of fear of losing you. Like, we love you and you're our anchors, and you anchor us in our communities and our homelands and our culture, but we're scared to death to lose that. And a lot of us end up losing it. A lot of us go to urban areas to find ourselves and to find a different community because we want acceptance, but we've given up an awful lot just to be there and just to find out who we are and to come into ourselves. So I would say, to to people who are coming out, like, or who are having these experiences where they are knowing that it's time to transition, uh, to find your community, where that is, but also to, like, again, to just let that fear feed your strength to be who you are. It's not easy.
Mhm.
Uh, it was a very hard road. Um, and I think will continue to be a hard road because I think, much like racism, homophobia is ingrained in all of us. And so, and that's me, myself too. Like, I still move within those systems as well and have um, those moments that I've been socialized as, where I'm like, oh no, and my child within the last year has has told me that they prefer non-binary. And so uh, having a non-binary child, I even stopped in my own tracks there. As somebody who identifies as two-spirit and trans, I had my own moment of like, oh no, like, uh, because I think all of us wish for not an easy life, but I think I use that word because within this community, there is a real threat of, like, will will my authentic self uh, create a space that is unsafe, and will I live through this experience? And unfortunately, a lot of the time, that is, will I take my own life because I can't handle this anymore, or will somebody else kill me? And those are just two harsh realities within this community. And so, I had that moment of, oh no, when my own child came out to me, because I want them to be safe. I don't want them to go through the hardships that I went through. Um, and thankfully they have a really amazing community. And I think this next generation coming up is way ahead of all of us, with their terminology, with their acceptance, with their accountability and responsibility to each other. It's pretty amazing, and they're skipping way ahead of us. They're telling us that we don't need to have coming out stories. Like, I'm sorry you went through all that, but we live as we live and we are who we are. And there's no reason to stop and announce that we're coming out. We're just living as we are. And so I think as we continue to grow as community, And our next generations come in, they're finding their power earlier and earlier, and their voice earlier and earlier, and that community structure is strengthening for them. And thank goodness that they're coming up in a way that they don't have to experience a lot of the hardships that I did, and they don't even know what the hardships are of the elders who came before me, which I think in some ways is like sad, but also good because it's showing that there is positive movement for our queer youth.
Mhm. I think we're at an incredible time with the Brave New World, where the just saying the word queer, just saying some of the words that are healing and acceptable for opening up our community. I just think that and you're describing. I love how the millennials are so blessed. The younger people are so blessed. I'll be 65 pretty soon, and having lived through, I grew up in the Bay Area, where there was a large influx of people trying to find themselves and find their gender. But I just remember I had a coworker, and he came with five brothers that were all queer, two spirited. And I remember we shared an office, and being close to him, um, we his family had tried to have him go through psychoanalysis to and it was painful. So in a nutshell, he went through this, and so he tried to go have a wife, and he tried to go have some children, and that wasn't what worked. But he did do that, and he did have a child. But I remember when he started getting sick, and this is like 1981, 1982, and when he started getting sick from AIDS. At that time, there was so much fear. As he started getting sick, everyone would not was shh, don't say that. Shh, shh. And then I just remember, but what I remember about him is being such a compassionate, gentle person. And I'm just so can you talked about these. I'm sharing that because you talked about these masks that we learn to wear to become our authentic self, and that as we learn, the millennials maybe aren't born with these masks. Can you speak a little about some of the masks that we might wear, and that how you take these masks off to become your authentic self?
Yeah, I think that the masks that I'm talking about for our community members, and I would also like go as far to say performance art, um, because I think most of it is fear-based masks. We don't want to lose family members. We don't want to lose community. I think, we have this saying of being indigenous folks that we live in two worlds. But I think also when you have your two-spirit people, your queer community, we also live in two worlds within the indigenous community. And so it's trying to find our way. And, these ways have been around for a long time. Like there are over 130 documented tribes that had two-spirit communities, two-spirit leadership. Um, you know, and it's said that, when we had first contact, that our two-spirit people were often the ones who went to speak to these uh, colonizers and basically welcome them to the land and figure out why they were here. Um, so we've always had really important roles as healers, doctors, medicine people, um, people who helped make decisions, people who were matchmakers. We often uh, took care of orphaned children. We just had a medicine and about us, and it was with that contact that um, that we started to be abused and killed. And so oftentimes a lot of the elders that I've spoke to about it, say, well, we pushed our people underground. We told them, you have to live this way now, because if you don't, you will be killed. And so I think right from the very beginning of contact, like there's this idea of like we can't be who we are, or we will die. And so that's a really stark reality. And so yeah, I think those masks come on early, and that they're fear based, and that it's mainly because we don't want to lose anybody. um and like uh just to keep it with current times, we're in a pandemic right now, but I think, as indigenous folks, we've had many pandemics, whether that's uh, loss of homelands and relocations and boarding schools and loss of parenting and stuff like that. But um, as two-spirit individuals, we've also had these silent pandemics going on of the AIDS epidemic, and losing people that way, and it being so hush hush. Like I often joke that being two-spirit and in the indigenous community is like being in the army. It's like, don't ask, don't tell. Like, we'll let you live as you are, and magically someday you show up with a wife. We're not going to call her your wife, we're going to call her your friend. And then maybe sometime later down the road you show up with a child, and we'll accept that child and treat you as a family, but as long as you don't talk about it. And so, I think that causes a lot of trauma and pain too, and reinforces wearing those masks of like, okay, I'm accepted to this point. And so to keep me safe and to keep my family safe, and to keep what I have in my world, that I need to continue wearing a mask. And maybe pieces of it can come off here and there as I expose who I am and as I live in my true authenticity. But I think that as I said before, sometimes you get so stuck in that performance, that in that mask, that you can even forget who you are sometimes. And so um I think it's just really important, like I was talking about some of my coming out story, and then having an event that I went to where a really prominent person in my community was there, and I was scared. I was like, oh my God, I've shared my story a lot of times now, but not in front of this person, and how are they going to take it? And I was really scared and really nervous about it. And then I shared, and then at the end of the event, they walked up to me and they're like, thank you so much for sharing your story. Really liked it. Um, but we knew a long time ago. And this was like a kind of community auntie, and I was just like, what? Like that was kind of a shock to me too. And it was just like, don't leave those things unsaid. I think if that's something that we could also get from this pandemic, tell people you love them, tell them that you care about them, tell them that like, and definitely don't out people, and definitely keep safety and those kind of boundaries in mind when you're talking to people. But I think our families could save us so much grief and anguish sometimes in our own experiences by just telling us or talking to us about it and having conversation. And I think that conversation should be as free flowing with you and your daughter as it with me and my child, and with anybody else, of just like, whoever you love will happen when it happens. And having those be normal conversations. And hopefully we're having conversations with our children about sex for the first time, and how to be safe in doing that. And so I hope that those can be regular conversations with our children as they're coming up too, because oftentimes our kids know this at age 3, 4, and 5, and we'll sit back and think that's too young. That's too young. They don't know, but oftentimes they do know. Like I was solid in who I was, and knowing I didn't know what the words were. I didn't know the meaning of it, but I definitely knew at 4 and 5 that this is something different, and this is something that I'm going to have to be careful with for my entire life. And it's grown and evolved into different things as I've grown and evolved in my life, but I definitely knew at 4 and 5. And so I think just meeting people where they're at is important, but also just knowing that because a lot of us live and move within that fear constantly, that's not a constant fear for cisgender heterosexual people? Like, are you living in constant fear that your mother's not going to love you because who you marry? No, you're constantly getting reassurance that, oh yeah, that's a good man for you. Or yeah, when you get married and have children, or you're going to be a cheerleader, or you're going to, be a famous basketball player. Like, there's certain like things that go along with gender and sexuality that cisgender heterosexual folks don't have to think about, and they don't live in fear in living how they were socially constructed. Like, it's just accepted, it's a part of the social fabric. When you step outside of that, there is a lot of fear. So I think just having people realize that, what does it look like from your family member's viewpoint? And I know that we can't always step right into other people's shoes, but I think having a conversation, doing your research, and trying to figure out, what this mask means for some people is really important, so that we don't continue to lose more folks to suicide and to murder. Like, it's devastating to hear, and it's scary to hear. Um, and it really influences how much of us we share with you.
Mhm. Asa, I was, in our Blackfoot Confederacy and like different Navajo Nation, Zuni. I was thinking in other tribes, their traditional words that they have for someone that is queer, two-spirited, LGBTQ. Those words have been around thousands of years with us, but there's also a lot of the tribes or the indigenous, when they recognize this in that 3-year-old or that 4-year-old, they actually see them as the potential to be like holy people. They had gifts, they had creative energy, they wanted to sit by their side, they wanted to get prayed over by them. So maybe a question, or just we could visit about, when because I know you as an artist, man, you're an artist, in many ways. I seen you, tattoo or tamoko, or I seen your artistry on individuals, letting them become themselves. Can you visit about, because that part, with your story, how did was the creativeness? Because when you're born with it, it seems normal. When you can just create beautiful things, that seems normal. But it has to do. I think it has to do with. I still believe they're holy people. I mean, I just believe like, and by holy people, that they're closer to spirit or something. Can you speak about that creativity, or about that, um how we saw it as indigenous people? Because I know you're a research person and historian. Can you share that with some of our audience here?
Yeah, so I know there's different stories uh, in relationship to spirit, but from what I have learned throughout the years, um, that word two spirit was born out of the idea that we have two spirits, a masculine and a feminine, which help guide us. But I would, beg to say that, or beg not to differ, but just to say, go as far as saying that is everybody. That's every human under the sun. That we both share that. But that's where that was really born from, in that uh, knowing from knowing from a place of masculine and feminine would help guide the people in a better way, because it wasn't just skewed to just a masculine view or just a feminine view. So I think, that's my interpretation of it, is that the thing that was different about two spirit people is that they're guided by both. Um, and that those perspectives would help move our people along. And that's the medicine that two spirit folks carry. What I think is really amazing about I was just talking about this the other day about our roles as Two-Spirit folks, is that, you know, we have these documented roles of being like within leadership, helping make decisions, and then, you know, being medicine people, being artists, being foster parents, and now looking at our contemporary roles as people. Often our Two-Spirit folks are still within those same roles. You know, they're leading ceremonies. Um, they are doctors and healers. They're social workers. A lot of them are social workers. A lot of them are public health servants. Like, we work for and with the people always. A lot of us work with children too, and our foster parents, or work within education. So it's just really interesting to see that no matter what we've been through since contact, that we still, are called to those same roles. And I think that that is because of the medicine that we carry as people. Um, and so, yeah, I think it's really interesting. Um, and myself too, like, I, you know, had worked within the public health field for a long time. And then I've worked, you know, here and there off and on for the last 10 years within suicide prevention, which is really important to me. And as a person who identifies as a survivor of that, um, I feel like compelled and like a sense of responsibility, um, to keep moving within the fear that I live in, to share that story and connect with folks, so that other people, um, you know, survive and then thrive. Like, that's really what I want people, you know, to do. And I really want them to find the connection and find their space to be that their true self, um, and to be honored within their communities. I think it's really important. For myself, um, you know, I founded Portland Two-Spirit Society. uh, I founded it twice, I feel like, because when I first started the group, um, I started it within the queer community here in Portland, which at the time was really, really white. And so uh, it was hard starting in that community because I felt like I was leaving an identity behind. Um, and so it kind of was on hold for a little bit after that. And then I brought it into the Native community, and I was so scared to bring it into the Native community. Um, but as soon as I did, I found other people who were looking for that same connection. And before I started that group, I was driving to Seattle, on the weekends, almost every weekend, to see their Two-Spirit Society and to really find those connections with them. So that connection is really important. Finding other people who know your experience. That was the first time, like, I felt like I could take a deep breath and just let all the weight I've been carrying on my shoulders off for the first time in my life. I was like, wow, like, this has never existed for me. I've never been in a space where I don't have to uh, explain who I am as a Two-Spirit person. I don't have to explain who I am as a queer person. I don't have to explain who I am as an Indigenous person. Like, everybody in this room right now is queer and Indigenous. Like, that was such a powerful moment for me. And I knew that that's when I had to move forward and take that step that others might have been afraid to, and start Portland Two-Spirit Society, because I knew that if I was feeling this way, other people were feeling this way and were wanting that space. And it's funny because, like, the organizer and myself, um, was like, oh, we'll set it up this way. And then as soon as I set it up, it went right to family and community, and really just became a space about people sharing time and experience together,
Mhm.
people eating together, people having ceremonies together, um, just being who were with no agenda, was so freeing for a lot of people. And so, um, yeah, those roles are important. And I always find it interesting that no matter what we've been through, we continue to come back to those roles.
You know, one of the things I wanted to ask you about, and it's kind of like so that we can help everyone create safer spaces to blossom. We and it has to do with drugs and alcohol. a lot of our sobriety community here, every year we would just sponsor like a dance, but we sponsored it on coming out day. And the first time that we did it was, we talked to the counselors at the high school, and we just said we just want to have a dance, and then we're going to have some speakers, and a lot of the speakers were older and they told their coming out story. But I just remember the first time we had it, and we thought we invited everyone from Browning High School. And so we were like, we were anxious on pins and needles, and then we had our community there of allies, and then we just got blown away because this whole 3 carloads, 3 carloads came to that first celebration.
Wow, that's
and
great.
and then we had about 3 people tell their coming out story, and one of the gentlemen, he was in his late 60s, and then we had someone who was in their 40s, but these were all then I saw a couple of my relatives, and that I didn't know till they came to this coming out dance. And it was just but ever since that time, whenever I see them, I'm their auntie. I notice, and I'm just totally their auntie, and expressing and not wearing no masks, and just celebrating however they define themselves. Can you tell us a little bit? And I hate to look at the clock, but we got about we got about. Can you tell us a little bit about how those listening to us, how we can start to encourage or create safe spaces or celebrations? So, can you talk about that, Asa?
Yeah, definitely. Like I said before, I think it's good if you're at a brand new starting point with this, to do some research, to Google. Just as we, ask, our non-Indigenous folks to Google stuff about Indigenous folks, I would, say that's a good starting point. A lot of folks have been through a lot of trauma, and so they're not ready to, they might be at a place where they're not ready to start educating you because they're still trying to figure out who they are. um, so I would say that's a good starting point. Just to know that there's difference between sexuality and gender. So if your child comes out to you as um, with a like a trans identity, that might be something completely separate from their sexuality and how they identify in their sexuality. So just knowing that there's differences between sexuality and gender, and then keeping an open mind that beneath both of those, beneath sexuality, there's a lot to wrangle in there. And then gender, there's a lot to wrangle in there, and to realize that as Indigenous people here on Turtle Island and and beyond, that often before colonizers, before religious influence, our communities lived as very fluid people. Just as we grow into our names and get new names as we age, um, our sexuality and our genders were really considered very fluid. And we as community has come to a healing spot, a place where we we can move on that self-determination. I think it's really important uh, to look at our families and where we want to be, and realize that we might lose people if we don't offer these spaces, and if we don't start moving into that role of acceptance that was there before contact. And so just realize that. And I think an important thing my mom always taught me was to question everything. And so uh, I often get in trouble with this sometimes, but I do question what is traditional, and how do we know that that's traditional? How do we know that only men do those things? How do we know that only women do those things? We're so far beyond contact now, and we've lost a lot of our culture and a lot of our stories. But there are still some stories that exist out there. that might say otherwise to what you call traditional or what has always been. So I think that in coming up with those supportive places and in learning and doing research, you might just shock somebody, and they'll realize that um, that you're a safe person to be around, that they can take that mask off, that they can be themselves. And I think that's really important. I think it's really important just to, also give our kids who are coming up the space to be who they are, and to really honor them as people. They're not us, they're them. And as we've moved closer to this healing spot as Indigenous people, we often talk about the spirit of our people, the spirits and ceremonies. And I think that we should move back to that space of honoring our spirits and talking about each other as spirits, because our time here is limited, but we are spirits. And so if we're talking about each other in that honored way as spirits, then we'll drop these roles, we'll drop all these expectations on ourselves, other than just to be human and have a human experience. And I think that would really, that would really fill that gap of loss for a lot of us, if we could just be seen, you know, as those humans, as those spirits who are existing in this space for this short amount of time, and that we should all feel welcomed in our roles, whatever those roles may be.
Mm-hmm. No, Asa, thank you so much for just what you've shared with us so far. I'm sure that it's got, my wheels in my heart. I don't know. I just feel good in my heart that we're having this conversation, and I want to thank you, from Native Wellness Institute, because we're just opening a door, and we're invited Asa to come, and we're going to be back on tomorrow with part 2. And so, you said that you had a poem, and
Yeah.
yeah, and so I I didn't want to have us go off without you. If you want to say anything about the poem, or maybe that could be like our because poems are ceremonies. I love poems. Could you share that? Can you tell us about it and share your poem with us?
Yeah, thank you. It's from Khalil Gibran. It's from the book The Prophet. But the title is On Children. I read this when I was 15 years old, and man, it hit me, because I was just like, wow, okay, I'm my own person. I have authority over myself and my body and who I am. Um, it was really powerful then, and it has literally stuck with me in my whole life, and actually something that I shared with my own child, and really formed the way I parent. So I think it's really powerful for me, and I hope that you hear something in it from what I've shared today and what I'll continue to share tomorrow. Um, but it's on children. Um, your children are not your children. They are the sons and daughters of life's longing for itself. They come through you, but not from you. And though they are with you, yet they belong not to you. You may give them your love, but not your thoughts, for they have their own thoughts. You may house their bodies, but not their souls, for their souls dwell in the house of tomorrow, which you cannot visit, not even in your dreams. You may strive to be like them, but seek not to make them like you, for life goes not backwards, nor tarries with yesterday. You are the bows from which your children, as living arrows, are sent forth. The archer sees the mark upon the path of the infinite, and he bends you with his might, that his arrows may go swift and far. Let your bending in the archer's hand be for gladness, for even as he loves the arrow that flies, so he also loves the bow that is stable.
Mm. Gosh, thank you. I remember hearing and reading that, because that was like UC Berkeley's. That was so. Thank you for reading that. And is there any other closing comments you want before we sign off? Before we come on tomorrow?
I just wanted to say that thank you for having me, and I appreciate sharing space with all of you. And you know, I've given my life to this, to be who I am, regardless of that fear. And I'm to a point in my life where I feel like it's my responsibility to share my story and to share oral history about Two Spirits and the Two Spirit experience from my own personal perspective and my lived experience. So I'm just glad to be here and grateful for the opportunity to speak with you all tomorrow again as well. But feel free to reach out to me if you have questions beyond this or want information or resources. So thank you.
So Asa, I always have to. That's just to you for your courage and for everything that you do. And on behalf of Native Wellness Institute, we just really honor and we appreciate you coming to have this dialogue. And we appreciate everyone who came and listened. Have others tune in tomorrow. We're going to have part 2 beginning at noon Pacific Standard Time. This is sponsored by N7. And again, it's our 39th week. It's about time we start talking about and visiting with some of this. So thank you, Asa. And so we're going to sign off and we'll see you tomorrow.
All right. See you.